Hello, everyone. I am DJ Landro. Welcome back to the DJ Landro Music YouTube channel. And in this video, I'm going to show you how you're going to use Reverb like a pro. Now, before I get started, it is very important to understand exactly what reverb is. As a starting producer, up-and-coming producer, I'm sure you hear reverb a lot, but don't really quite understand what reverb is. What reverb is, it is the natural reflection of sound in any certain space. For an example, for argument, when you walk into, let's say, a big hall or an empty room, and let's say you clap your hands or stomp your feet, for example, you will hear a sound bouncing and reflecting around. That bounce that you're hearing is reverb. In music production, we use reverb plugins to recreate that effect to add a sense of space, depth within our recordings. So, for example, which I've got here, I've got three audio tracks. I've got a vocal, I've got a clap, and I've got a percussion. We're going to go through each of them to show you how you can use reverb with each of them and to get the most out of them and to help your productions. Okay, so here we have a vocal. Let's listen to it as a dry signal. When we refer to dry signals, we're meaning without any processing. When we refer to wet, that means that we have processed it with reverb. So this is now a dry signal. So let's have a listen.
God is everywhere, even in a kiss. So why do you think I don't know when you're lying?
Okay, now we're going to make it a wet signal. We're going to add a reverb to it. So we'll add an insert reverb. Just a quick example. We're going to add RAM. And now let's have a listen to the wet signal, now that it's got a reverb in it.
God is everywhere, even in a kiss. So why do you think I don't know?
Okay, now that you've heard both examples, you can see how instantly this is adding life, character, and depth to that specific sound. But one thing to remember is that by using too much reverb, you can also make a certain track element get lost within the track, lose its essence, and make it much weaker and bleed into the rest of your production. Now, if that's what you want, by all means, of course, you could do it. This is purely subjective. But one thing you have to bear in mind is that you cannot add too much reverb for something, let's say, like a lead vocal, which is quite one of the main elements within your track. Let's say you have a vocal track. So you want to be sure that you're using your reverb correctly and not overusing it, because else your main element that you're using, whatever it can be, a vocal, a lead guitar, whatever, if you're adding too much reverb, it's going to weaken that element and it's going to take away from your track. Okay, so now that I've shown you a quick example of that, let's talk about the different types of reverb that we have, or at least the main types. The first main type of reverb that you get is called a plate reverb. This is really good for vocals. It gives a nice, smooth, and shiny effect. The second main reverb that we have is called a room reverb, which is really good for adding a natural sound and very perfect for small spaces, as well as small instruments like one hits from your drums or percussions. And then the third main reverb that we have is a hall reverb. This is really ideal for, let's say, orchestral instruments or pads or cinematic tracks. So that will really help you with that. The best thing to do is to choose a reverb based on the vibe that you are going for. Yes, these are the main reverbs that you get, and they are specifically can be used at their best for these elements that I mentioned, but that doesn't mean you cannot experiment by adding, let's say, a whole reverb to a vocal or a plate reverb to, let's say, a violin. So feel free to experiment and find a vibe that works for you. Okay, so now let's open a reverb in Cubase and let's get working on that so you can get a nice, good idea of how to use one. Okay, so in Cubase, you'll go to Reverb, find a nice one which I like, which is called Roomworks. Okay, and then this is what you are greeted with. Okay, so it's usually quite self-explanatory. For argument's sake, the size is usually the size of the room that you want. Okay. And then we've got our reverb time, which is basically the bounce. How long do you want it to stay within your track? right? And then the width is obviously like the stereo width. And then here is what is very, very important. It is EQ. So now that I've shown you a little bit on how a reverb will work, I'm going to go through each of them, the highlights of each of these knobs to get the best out of your tracks. Okay, so number one is a pre-delay. Now, what a pre-delay does is that it adds a very short pause before the reverb actually kicks in. This is going to help you to keep your sound clear without making it muddy. As you can see, as I lift this, which is timed, by the way, as you can see, MS standing for milliseconds, is that if I go all the way to the left, 0 milliseconds, there will be no pre-delay. But as I move away, you can actually see the signal moving of the break between, let's say this is where your audio signal will be played, and then the reverb. Okay. And then another thing, very important, right, is the EQ, as I mentioned earlier. Now, always EQ your reverb. The reason why you want to do this is because you want to roll off your low end frequencies to avoid a boomy mix and cut any harsh highs. So, especially like the low end, you don't want to keep basically a lot of low end within your reverb, especially when it comes to, let's say, a vocal. You don't want that. You want to keep it a little bit more shiny. But at the same time, you don't want to boost it too much or you don't want it too shiny because then it's going to be too harsh for the person listening to it. So now we will play our vocal and show you the differences that it does.
When you're lying, know when you're trying to hide how you feel from me. God is everywhere, even in a kiss. So why do you think I don't know when you're lying? Know when you're trying to hide how you feel from me. God is everywhere, even in a kiss. So why do you think I don't know when you're lying? Know when you're trying to hide how you feel from me.
There we go. So now you can get a good feel for exactly how to use each of these basically effects within your track that you're working with. Okay, so now let's move away from the vocal and now let's work with, let's say, a clap. So let's have a listen to the dry signal. Okay, so now we can add a reverb on top of this, which I'm going to do now. So let's have a listen to this. Now I'm going to turn it off so you can have a listen again. Now, can you hear the difference? That as much reverb as I've added, we've actually sort of made it completely weak because we've added so much reverb. But let's say we still want that width, that space. This is where we're going to add a send effect reverb. I've done a video on this, send versus insert effects, which you can find in the top right-hand corner now, where I go into a little bit more detail. But in this case, I'm going to add a send reverb effect so I can show you some really cool tricks. And this is going to help you add reverb to your tracks without killing them, but as well as giving them a lot of space. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just right click here. We'll go to add effects track. There we go. And then round, which is the reverb that I used. I'll just call this reverb, this channel. Okay, now we have our reverb. Now I'm going to go back to my clap. I'll go to send, click reverb. Always click this button, make sure it's turned on. And then now to show you the difference of it. Okay, we're going to drop the volume here. And I'm going to turn up my reverb. I'll mute this. Can you hear the difference now? We are still maintaining that track's essence, but adding reverb to it. So getting space, but as well as not weakening the signal of that, which we are maintaining through adding a adding to a send effect and not a insert effect. I personally would recommend this using definitely on, let's say, a vocal or on any of your elements, depending again if you want to thin out a specific element or not. But majority of the time, this is what you're going to do. You're going to add a send effect and not a insert. Okay, let's now go to our percussion loop to use this example. So let's have a listen to the dry signal. Okay, now we're going to add again our send effect reverb. There we go. Let's have a listen now. Okay, now let's say we're happy with this. But as you can see, there's a lot of low end in this percussion. Now, remember as I mentioned earlier, with regards to reverb, we want to kill the low end. We don't really want it. So this again is what is nice about using a send effect, is that we've got more control over the reverb itself. So what we can do is we can click here, our FX channel, which is our reverb, and let's have a listen now. And we can actually EQ our reverb according to how we want. You can hear now the difference and how much control we actually have. Whereas, for argument's sake, in our Cubase reverb of Roomworks, all we did was just basic, we just had a high and low end frequency that we could boost or cut. So yes, you do have control, but not as much control as we would as if we had our own channel where we can control it entirely, just the reverb, not just the reverb and not the entire tracks that we are using and mixing with. Just a few more extra tips to keep in mind with regards to using reverb is that you can adjust the decay, which I'll show you here. This you can adjust according and this is really going to help you within your productions. That is why I personally prefer using send effects. And these methods are going to definitely help you get the most out of your productions. Just two more tips that I'm going to leave you with. First one being is that you can adjust the decay, which I'll show you here now. Here we go. As you can see, here's our decay. You can adjust it according to what you want. For argument's sake, it works really, really well with pads as well as ambient tracks because it is going to make the decay much longer and brought out, while shorter decay is really good for, let's say, single instruments, like let's say our clap that we had or our percussion, because we don't want them to carry on because they're changing constantly all the time. And then the last tip that I'm going to leave you with is automation of reverb, something that a lot of people tend to overlook. This is really, really nice. They can create some really dramatic effects. You can try increasing the reverb during certain, let's say, breakdowns or choruses to have extra impact, which I can show you now. So let's say we have our percussion. We're going to go back here. I'm going to turn off my send effect here. So let's listen to our percussion. Now I'm going to add a reverb. Okay, now let's say we want to increase the decay. So what we're going to do is we'll play this now. I'm going to record this. Okay, now let's have a listen to what it's going to sound like now that we've automated, let's say for argument's sake, the decay. Yeah, so that's also another tip that I'm going to just leave you with before I let you go, that can add some really nice effects within your tracks. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Using these tips is definitely going to help you with your productions and it's going to make you use reverb like a pro. If you like this video, don't forget to share as well as like and subscribe to the channel. I am DJ Leandro and I'll catch you in the next video.